dragon with the mannerisms and size of a cat. Who doesn't want to bring one of these into your game? Okay, let's be honest, I'm doing this video purely as a self-indulgence, because I have a cat, and sometimes wish it could, wish it were a pseudo-dragon, or at least be able to communicate like one. And this is us going straight into the video, and we are starting there apparently, with communication. Pseudo-dragons are tiny dragons, not fae. Sometimes as small as your thumb, that communicate through transmissions of emotions. Well, telepathically through transmission of emotions, images and simple ideas. They can also vocalize some animal noises, such as a rasping purr for pleasure, a hiss for unpleasant surprises, or a chirp for desire, or a growl for anger. They're most commonly found as familiars, though it's worth noting that familiars are bound to celestial, fae, or fiend spirits that take on the form of creatures. So not the real version of those creatures, though they may take on their mannerisms and traits as well as their appearance. I mentioned that as within the monster manual, a pseudo-dragon variant for a familiar is outlined. It basically outlines that they can be used as familiars, they share senses so long as they are no more than a mile apart, and that their magic resistance trait can be shared to the bonded person so long as they are no more than 10 feet apart. It's very handy. And speaking of bonds, they are very particular about who they bond with. They will examine a potential partner from a distance, watching how they interact with others, the things they do, how they treat others, whether they're a tape bro. Basically looking for toxic red flags. And then, when they decide to present themselves to their potential partner, if they are not absolutely stoked and amazed by the pseudo-dragon, they will move on and try to find another potential partner. They want to be adored and feel valued, as we all do. What do they look like? I haven't mentioned this yet, and I don't know why. They normally have reddish-brown scales, a long tail twice the length of their body, which is normally a foot long, though they have been known to come in different colours, from dark green to bright yellow to even blue. They really do look like tiny dragons, even down to the horns on their head, full of hardened skin on either side of their face, leading into their horns, which ultimately sit above their spined back. Their sharp teeth jut out from their jaws beyond their lips, and they do have a long forked tongue, and wings of course. They have claws, though these are mainly used for movement rather than offense. Now a bit about them mechanically, they are classed as a tiny dragon, neutral good. They have an AC of 13, 7 hit points, speed of 15 feet, but they fly at 60 feet per round. They have a +3 to perception and a +4 to stealth, so I imagine they tend to glide that 60 feet rather than make too much noise flapping their wings. As with all dragons, they have blind sight, but only out to 10 feet, 60 feet of dark vision, and a passive perception of 13. And speaking of perception, they have keen senses, so advantage on perception checks with sight, smell, and sound. They understand Common and Draconic, but as I mentioned, they can't speak besides their wee noises and chirps and their telepathy. They have 2 offensive capabilities, their Bite and their Sting. Bite's a bite, +4 to hit, 1d4 +2 piercing damage. The Sting is a little something else though. Same attack and damage, however there is a save for poison. DC 11 con save against poison for an hour. Though if the target fails the DC by more than 5, they become unconscious for the same amount of time. As I mentioned earlier, they also have a magic resistance as a main ability. Now what does that mean for us? Well, simply they have advantage on saving throws against spells and magical effects. That's it. Not too mechanically complicated at all. They're fairly straightforward for as magical as they come across. And all for a total of a challenge rating 1/4. Of course, that isn't everything about pseudo-dragons. So, pulling from older sources, pseudo-dragons are normally found living in trees or caves in temperate forests. They look much like tiny red dragons, just with a tail twice as long as their body. The colour of their skin can change, not as much as the chameleons, but still very distinct changes. This is to aid in stalking their prey or hiding from larger predators. They do this innately, as they have small melanin-filled sacs under their scales, which are actually translucent. They use these sacs, called chromatophores, to change their colour, which they shift into position with nerve impulses. On the topic of their scales, they do shed, so up until 12 months they will shed their skin once a month as they grow out of it, and then as they grow older, twice a year. They are omnivorous, eating small rodents or insects along with leaves and fruits. They are quite solitary in the wild, being that they are particular about their bonded partners, and some sources say they hibernate through the winter. Coming back a wee bit to their personality, a lot of sources I've read refer to them as cat-like. Now to me, most dragons are cat-like. When I describe them moving or laying atop their hoard or preening themselves, I can't help but picture a cat, and that's the way I describe them. And the way pseudo-dragons go on, it's no different. They're proud, self-absorbed, demand attention and affection constantly from their bonded partner. and they do not suffer folks calling them pets. I am reiterating this, they are not your pet. They are a companion, and you are blessed by their patience to grace you with their presence. If mistreated, they have been known to play pranks on their companions or ultimately just leave. And how do they play pranks on their companions? Well, first, let's mention their stinger. Their sting attack in older publications described it as a barbed stinger at the end of its highly flexible tail. The stinger is extremely sharp, like a hypodermic needle, and is attached to a venom sac in the bulbous end of its tail. It's mentioned that as their tail is twice as long as their body, they rear up like a scorpion does with its stinger and can attack while facing their prey head on. While on the topic of their stinger, it was a lot more powerful than what it is in 5th edition. For instance, that poison effect that lasts for an hour? How about being nigh on dead for 1 to 6 days? As in you're afflicted by catalepsy. See, back to the cats. Catalepsy is the appearance of death, so completely incapacitated. And at the end of your affliction, a 1 in 4 chance of actual death. And how is this a prank? Well, they're smart. An intelligence of the average humanoid, and well, when you come down with a bad case of the being poisons, they like to leave you in compromising poses. Some of which are the I'm trying but can't even do one push-up, the dead fly, so legs and arms up in the air while you're on your back, the swimming on land, and I can't help but imagine them doing the draw me like one of your French girls. And if they manage to sting a few of you, you can guarantee that they will leave you all piled together, spelling out words or less graceful positions. Do you want to be a pseudo-dragon? Will you be a pseudo-dragon? This is my pseudo-dragon. She's called Tito. My pseudo-dragon has decided to join me. So if you hear purring, I'm sorry. Their venom can be milked and used like other poisons. The venom goes for around 100 gold pieces an ounce. A healthy pseudo-dragon can create 20 ounces of venom a week, though they do not like being milked as it is taking away their greatest offensive capability and is rather uncomfortable. And as for reproduction, and I'm only mentioning it because the lore exists and I'm going to put it out as plain as I can. They gather for 3 very active days a year in springtime, and it's definitely a group endeavour where sharing is caring. Just hatched pseudo-dragons are called hatchlings and infants are called whelps. And now we don't need to ever mention that ever again. Now, as for where they came from, in-game, we don't know. They may have evolved as part of the ecosystem, but we just don't know. One would assume that they did, because wouldn't you just imagine that's the case for most creatures in D&D in a fantasy realm? But with dragons, it's a bit different. See, dragons come from the higher god Io, or Ao, I think it's Io. There's some lore about how Io created 2 children. These were the dragons Bahamut and Tiamat, good dragons and evil dragons, and all dragon kind spawned from them, yada yada yada. So dragons can kind of be traced lore-wise, but it doesn't explain pseudo-dragon origins. But I have a thought for you there. Or more thanks to the 2nd edition module Cult of the Dragon, page 91, Arcane Forge here on YouTube has a thought for you. In one of Arcane Forge's Dragon December videos, she highlights a spell in the module called Pseudodragon. AD&D spells. They were so creative in their names. Pseudodragon was a creature summoning spell that could only be cast by dragons, or draconic blood, and it would summon 2d4 mini versions of the summoning dragon, as in same alignment and colour, and would be under the summoner's command. These pseudo-dragons would be paid 50 gold pieces each for their service, and if they were summoned to attack foes, they would be paid 50 gold pieces and 1 body for each of them so they can consume it. If these conditions weren't met, the spell would become less effective over time until ultimately failed to cast and no pseudo-dragons would appear. So imagine, if you will, that these pseudo-dragons are created from the spell as miniature simulacrums of the caster rather than summoning them from somewhere else. And they act under command until mistreated, and since they are many versions of the caster, they have some level of autonomy. So imagine that they were mistreated while summoned, and like disgruntled writers to a studio just said, nah, up yours, and walked out to do their own thing. Stay strong, WGA. Then they met another pseudo-dragon who did the same thing, and they started a family. It's not canon, but it's a cute headcanon. Thanks Arcane Forge for that, and the very cool artwork you created through Dragon December. Okay. Tell a lie, pseudo-dragons don't really come as small as your thumb. That's something I threw in there solely inspired by this next segment. I need to mention something that isn't necessarily about pseudo-dragons, but it is so cute I could not help but mention it by association. This is from a writing prompt post on Reddit in 2017, particularly mild swearing at 4 AM's entry, and I cannot recommend enough that you steal this. Getting in character here. The dragon's definition of steal is somewhat loose. It still allows the coin to be used and bartered and change hands, but on one condition. The dragon must be with it at all times. They become a familiar sight in the marketplace. Here's your change, ma'am. 1 gold piece. The merchant holds out a palm, on top of which rests a tiny, brilliantly coloured creature clutching a single gold coin. You cautiously reach out and attempt to take your change. You tug it. It holds. You tug harder. The dragon lets loose a tiny, protective growl. Ma'am, no, ma'am, you have to take the dragon too. The seller notes your dubious expression. Not from around here, are you? They shrug. Them's the rules. Take the coin, take the dragon. They wait expectantly. Wondering how the world has suddenly gone so mad, you slowly hold out your hand. The dragon perks right up, it scampers from their palm to yours, with the coin clamped in its jaws, and scales your sleeves with sharp little claws. Have a nice day, ma'am, the merchant says. Spend him soon now, you hear? At another booth, if you can. He likes to travel. From its perch upon your shoulder, the dragon lets out a happy little trill. The end. Okay, this thread is filled with beautiful little stories based off the prompt. The world's tiniest dragon must defend its hoard, a single gold coin from those who would steal it. The excerpt I read out is no longer there, or I can't find it at least, but the most upvoted currently, and rightly so, is the story of Vesper and Lace by WiKids. Cannot recommend checking it out enough. These are perfect for random encounters or just great ways to add familiars to your party or give them companions. Notice I didn't say pet. The tidbits! In older versions of the monster manual, pseudodragons had an immunity to paralysis and sleep. I just mention it as if for some reason you want to boost your pseudodragons or make them more unique. There are subtle ways to do it, such as this. Do you want your own pseudodragon? And I'm not going to hold up my cat again. I mean, I actually own one. WiKids, who make officially licensed minis for Wizards of the Coast, released a life-size slumbering pseudodragon made from latex and foam, and it fits perfectly on a perch of books. I will link to the backorder page below. You may remember fairy dragons from the monster manual. Well, they are actually a chaotic offshoot of the pseudodragon. And I don't mean they're similar, I mean they share descendants. A fairy dragon is essentially a pseudodragon that has acclimatized to the Feywild. In the 3rd edition monster manual, they talk about how a pseudodragon egg can go for up to 10,000 gold pieces, or a hatchling can go for as much as 20,000 gold pieces. But you wouldn't do that now, would you? You wouldn't. That'd be evil. But if you were to sell a hatchling pseudodragon, according to Dragon Magazine 269, it's likely its skin would be used in the production of rings of chameleon power, potions of rainbow hues, and cloaks of elven kind. And its blood is used in rings of spell resistance. Pseudodragons are actually cold-blooded animals. How you want to show that mechanically is up to you, but in 2nd edition they highlighted that at night they were more sluggish due to the colder temperature, and as such their attacks were at -2 to hit. But I can definitely see an artificer crafting a warm suit for a pseudodragon with a puffball hat and a hot water bottle pouch in winter. This cold-bloodedness would also explain why they like to spread out and bask in sunlight, kind of like how cats do. This is not in the 5th edition monster manual, but it's generally accepted from older versions that the +4 to stealth that pseudodragons normally get, that becomes a +8 in forests where they tend to reside. Pseudodragons have individual names, but they are not like what we would call them. They might have thought names. Since they don't speak and instead use telepathy, their names are different. So whereas someone would say, hello, your name, a pseudodragon's true name could be... fit this in here. Playful investigator who once got his nose stuck in a beehive and tried to cornering a skunk in a cave that one time. I know Mr. Rex used that one, but in fairness, it is the best example given. With such cumbersome names, they don't mind us untelepathic-minded folks giving them short or cure nicknames. They will brag to each other about their given names, almost as if it's a station of authority like Captain, Major, or Colonel. Oh, and the cuter the better. Lastly, though we call them pseudodragons, they apparently have their own name for themselves, which is Kaj. And that's pseudodragons, folks. I love these little guys. What isn't there to love about dragons that are cat-like? And I mean by dragons that are small enough to be a cat. That's so cool. Before I finish out this video, I do want to say thanks for watching. First off, because, thank you. If you want to do me a favor and like the video or subscribe, I'd really appreciate that too. I've started doing mini-series on TTRPG news and D&D news, so if you want the shorts and stuff like that, the best way to get them is to subscribe and you'll be notified. Okay, folks, that is it. Besides that, if you want to do me a favor and watch this video on Vecna that I did, it's an hour long. There's a lot of lore in it. You'll love it. Okay, thanks very much, folks. Take care. See you in the next one.